Hello, I'm Lily Hyam.
And I'm Gordon Johnston. Welcome to the Last Question podcast, brought to you by the Data Lab, Scotland's innovation centre for data and AI, hosted by the University of Edinburgh. We're delighted to be back for our second season.
It's great to be back, and we're excited to bring you more fascinating interviews with people at the cutting edge of science.
It's all very, very exciting. If you enjoy the podcast, please consider leaving us a rating or a review on your platform of choice. We really appreciate it, and it really helps bump us up the algorithms. So if you go forth and do that, that would be lovely. In a second, we'll introduce you to today's guest. But first, Lily, how do you feel about the moon? For or against?
Well, I think since I watched Moonfall, I have to say for, because isn't it something created by ancient aliens and it hosts like a AI swarm inside it or something?
Yeah.
So I probably should say yes, all hail moon.
I love the idea of the moon being an enormous megastructure. That film was fantastic. Like really, it was fantastic in a literal sense of the word.
Yeah.
In the same way that it was amazing.
Yeah.
That was fun though.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as a fun thing that I can think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's going to go down in like the annals of history as one of the masterpieces of cinema, but it was a lot of fun, and it had the guy from Game of Thrones in it.
Which one?
I don't know his name in Game of Thrones or in Moonfall.
I just don't know which any of those people were.
He was the guy who thought that the moon was a megastructure.
Oh.
But then there's the other guy who's in everything, but nobody knows his name. He's in like all the horror films.
But
he's
not
like,
helping me very much.
No.
Well, are you pro or against moon?
I'm fairly pro moon. You know, remember we learned in one of our other podcasts that the moon is in a unique position where like lunar eclipses aren't normal out there in the universe. It's actually really quite unique and special that our moon is in exactly the right position to do that. So that's pretty cool. So I think that in itself is a reason to be pro moon.
All hail. Our guest today is Dr. Katherine Rahill, Senior Scientist for the Office of the Chief Scientist of NASA's Human Research Program. She leads assessments to inform NASA's decisions concerning approaches and strategies to mitigate the risk of negative physiological effects associated with long-duration spaceflight. Her work entails monitoring research on human health and performance risks in NASA astronauts and providing strategic planning of integrated approaches to reduce those risks.
One of Katherine's main areas of interest is the gloriously named Lunar Psychophysics, a field of study that aims to understand the perceptual distortions humans experience while on the moon. Understanding why we see differently on the moon and in other non-Earth environments will be critical to the success of future manned space journeys to the moon, to Mars, to asteroids, and beyond.
Psychophysics is the subfield of psychology devoted to the study of physical stimuli and their interaction with sensory systems. For example, vibrating air hitting the bones in our ears to create perceptual sound is a psychophysical process. So without further ado, let's launch straight into our interview with Dr. Katherine Rahill of NASA.
Thanks so much for joining us, Katt.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So before we talk about the human experience of the moon, could you tell us a bit about what the moon's atmosphere or exosphere and surface is like and how it is different to Earth's?
Sure. So the best way I can summarize it is, the moon's atmosphere, what we call, exosphere, it's quite different from Earth's, and it has led to some unique challenges for multiple different reasons. But, having this thin exosphere creates essentially a vacuum and similar to the vacuum of space. It's very, very austere and not obviously suitable for life without life support systems. So that's, the predominant, difference between Earth and the moon's atmosphere. And so the lunar exosphere, it consists of a lot of high energy photons and all these solar wind particles. There's no atmosphere and it doesn't have enough gravity to keep things in. And so, it's often that, gases and all of these kind of, chemical reactions tend to dissipate rather quickly. This in combination with the lunar regolith, or the surface, in terms of, the materials that it's made out of, it also consists of, different types of dust particles with properties that, in combination just with the lack of an atmosphere on the moon, the way that the sun scatters is much more intense. It's not always equally distributed. And when it interacts with the lunar surface, it can create a really bizarre kind of ununiform type of scattering across the surface. And this can result in, distortion of, perception of objects, that are in the distance, up close to you. And you can either be completely blinded by the sun's brightness, or depending on how it's being scattered and the angle of the sun, it can also just conceal objects into the blackness of space altogether.
I remember looking at I went to an exhibition in Glasgow Science Centre that had, it was a photography exhibition from Apollo's photos of the moon landing. And looking at some of these pictures of hills in the distance and craters, and I could not tell at all whether it was a small hill close up or a big hill far away. So that must have been because of those lighting conditions, and maybe because of photography as well.
Yeah, so we call it on Earth that what Earth's atmosphere gives us is something called aerial or atmospheric perspective. So like off in the distance, as an object kind of increases with distance, especially if you're looking at a landscape and you have two objects, let's say mountains, you can always tell which one is further in the distance and the one that's closer to you because of the increase in contrast of that blue hue. So essentially Earth's atmosphere. So yeah, on the moon, it's really difficult to even, not only just perceive the actual size of an object, but also just differentiating which one's actually closer to you, which is something that's been a pretty big challenge. So yeah, it's really fascinating. It's really astounding just what those pictures show. And when you look at the actual distances that are reported, it's pretty mind-blowing.
So what kind of consequences would that kind of visual distortion have on the ability of like astronauts to actually do their job? Like if they're, say, like the Artemis mission trying to set up a permanent base on the moon, what kind of implications would this phenomenon have?
So when we look at the Apollo archival reports, there were frequent, almost just nearly consistent documentation of, perceptual distortion of terrain estimates, disorientation, physical overexertion, depletion of oxygen resources, and of course, aborted EVA missions on occasion. And usually this is because, I think it was Apollo 14, it was astronauts Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell. They initially estimated a large crater to be approximately, I think, roughly 200 to 300 yards away while navigating the lunar surface. This is after they landed. We're trying to, set up a terrain map for their surrounding landing site and so forth. And as they, kept walking on foot towards this crater, it just was not getting any closer. And soon they realized, after reassessing, that the crater was over a mile away. And we're talking, much farther than their initial estimates. So, after a series of kind of unsuccessful attempts of traversing this crater, also once they reached it, they were exhausted. They definitely underestimated how far they were going to be able to, travel. Their oxygen was depleting. And so they ended up, the goal of this mission was just to collect some crater samples right on the edge. They had no idea how close they were to the crater, but they immediately decided to, return back just to avoid, losing any more oxygen than they already had. And so with that, after the fact, when they do their after action mission reports at NASA, they found out that they were only 50 feet away from the crater. So it really gave us an interesting, perspective on, okay, so because of this topography and just all these different, external factors that we're not familiar with on Earth, it really just caused them to not be able to perceive the topographical depth of the surface on the moon and just all of these different types of contrast and textural features that they did not have in order to actually make, an assessment that would probably be a lot easier on Earth. So
I can't judge distances like on Earth at the best of times.
Oh no.
So I would be hopeless on the moon. I mean, for like myriad reasons, I'd be hopeless on the moon, but in particular, trying to judge distance.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so that's interesting because it's for the astronauts, there's like a planning how many supplies they need to take with them to get somewhere. There's a huge risk of death, and also from the perspective of like from NASA or whoever's in mission control, they're putting so much money into it, and when they see like a failed mission or sub mission on the moon, they're like, all that money and time that we've spent, and they're going to have to do it again and take more stuff with them. So from like everyone's perspectives, potential huge loss or actual huge loss. And I imagine it would be really disappointing and frustrating for the astronauts as well, with this like hope that they're going to come to something completely new that they're going to discover, and then it's like, oh, oops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's why NASA has been taking their, we've been, given an opportunity with Artemis that we didn't necessarily have with Apollo. So when I teach about this subject, a lot of times, the question, to your point, where what if we get to this point and we can't, succeed in this mission? What is this going to look like? And so the difference between Artemis and Apollo was that Apollo was done during a Cold War. It was a different mentality, a different effort, a different time. There were lives that were lost because of the efforts that we were trying to make to get to this, to the moon, to the space race, and all of that. So, with Artemis, we definitely have, I would say probably a luxury to really just sit and get through all of these, and also just relearn a lot of things. Technology has changed, everything's changed, and there's just a whole slew of things that NASA has to really revisit. And thankfully, we're given the opportunity to really take our time with it. Especially with our initial Artemis launch. It's yes, we had to delay it several times, but it was the right decision, and also safety is the priority overall. So but we do consider that. We don't want to put our first boots on the moon and having all these problems. So we definitely have the ability to really take the time to focus on all these different risks and areas and things like that too.
And this is technologies used when people actually get to the moon, but also new technologies we have now are helping people prepare but before the mission even starts as well. So one of the things you've been using in your experiments is virtual reality. So as well as the data and experiences from the Apollo missions, you have run experiments on more people on Earth that test their depth perception in VR simulated lunar environments, to research more about how things can be more successful on the moon, and a training, I suppose, as well. Did you find the experiences matched up in any way between the astronauts on the actual moon, from what they've said, and the experiences of the virtual reality participants?
I did find some similarities for sure, in that there are key benefits of having an Earth-like atmosphere for perception. And this did certainly aid in the estimations of distances and slopes in some conditions. Interestingly, though, I learned that having an Earth-like atmosphere alone is not enough to provide enough cues for perception. So, it's about surface reflectance features, terrain types, and of course, gravity. So one interesting similarity that I noted that I think is relevant to if we were to, do this in a real Earth environment as well, is how people estimate the sizes of craters. So I would compare how a person would estimate the size of one crater, same size, in both conditions. I would have them look at, an Earth crater and then a lunar crater, same dimension, same slope, everything. And because craters are not really a common feature on Earth, or for most people, it's not something we encounter typically compared to maybe something more of like a landscape familiarity, like, a mountain or something. It's interesting because they really overestimated the sizes of Earth craters. It was, they just saw them as so much bigger than they actually were. But we didn't really, but compared to the moon, they actually perceived most of them to be smaller. So, with these huge Earth craters, I learned that, okay, because Earth affords us with, uniform light distribution, and we have all these textures, we can see all the way to the bottom of these craters. So we can see the topographical depth of this terrain and be like, oh, okay, this is, this looks very steep, but also it's just an unfamiliar object. So in terms of, that maybe just estimates of size were a little off. But, interestingly, on the moon, and I tried to model my VR and, environments as closely to, what was described on the Apollo missions, is that some of the craters were concealed, or some craters you couldn't see at all. So in certain instances, we had astronauts that, mistakenly overestimated, a certain crater slope by 30 degrees. Or if they were on a lunar rover, they accidentally completely ran into a boulder because they just had no visibility whatsoever. So in terms of that similarity, I did see like, okay, so yeah, some of these unpredictable conditions that I am rendering in this environment are matching up. But, and another similarity I did find was also just the impact of lunar gravity, So in VR, obviously you can toggle the, gravity to, make it more realistic in that sense. So when they were driving, a lunar rover and lunar gravity, they also, I had many participants who ended up crashing their rovers, whether it be, flipping into a crater, having an accident. And of course, in a VR environment, you can reset it. On the moon, you cannot, but there were instances where they also, astronauts ran into accidents and things like that. So just trying to, recreate in an experimentally controlled way some of that, predicted potential, just like error or chaos that can occur just because you're dealing with so many unfamiliar, stimuli. So yeah, there was definitely some overlapping similarities, but VR in terms of that component is a different beast in of itself in terms of what it can be used for and the validity of it in some cases too. So
I was reading on your website that one of the results of the experiments that you ran was that participants could see textures better in the lunar virtual environment when the sun elevation was quite low at around 30-ish degrees. But that low elevation also cast really long shadows, which could conceal surface features, which affects the kind of estimation of distance and everything. So does this mean that at different times of day on the moon, they'd be better suited for particular tasks? If there's something that's really dependent on distance estimation, would it be better to wait for a particular time of day to do that? How would an astronaut plan his or her day according to sun elevation?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it is something that elevation was really crucial for a lot of astronauts, especially in the absence of other cues. They basically referred to sun elevation in three different, categories. They had cross sun, up sun, and down sun. And it was essentially 30, 60, and 90 degrees. And obviously, because of the brightness of the sun, when it was at lower elevation, it just wasn't as intense. It was kind of, the scattering was a little bit, diffused or kind of blockaded, I should say, rather, from terrain. But it also resulted in what you were saying is just very austere. Mike Collins, in Apollo 11, he described just the, in low elevation, orbiting the moon. It was just such a hostile looking environment. So, but yeah, astronauts, we definitely plan on using the sun to, obviously, plan our days accordingly. Interestingly though, in, one of our, upcoming missions, I believe it's Artemis 3, we were looking into potentially going to the lunar South Pole, and that practically has no light at all, none. And so this is a little bit different than the other areas of location. And of course, elevation and planning and time of, lunar day that you can perform tasks does vary depending on, where your landing site is located. But a goal to go to the South Pole is to, which is a very almost permanently shadowed place on the moon. It contains ice, other minerals, and other vital, resources, looking into maybe mining and things like that. So the absence of sunlight in that particular mission will be honestly the most challenging, mainly because, being in complete darkness for that extended period of time, we need to make sure that our astronauts are staying healthy. And also just EVAs are going to be so challenging. Imagine doing something in the black velvet of space. It's a different kind of blackness, than turning off the lights, in a room and what you're used to. So, it will be crucial. I think in this first mission, though, we're pretty honed in on trying to figure out how can we do everything in the absence of almost no light, which is going to be interesting.
That sounds absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
To be honest, I can't even imagine that kind of darkness. That it's not just dark; it's the complete absence of light. There's something. I mean, the psychological effects of that for any length of time must be really extreme.
Yeah, I feel sad in winter. Imagine how sad I'll be on the South Pole of the moon. Very sad.
You make it sound like this is an inevitability, that you're going to end up in the South Pole of the moon. It's just something we have to start preparing for.
I've got it on my bucket list. Also, I think us on Earth, we rarely have experienced total darkness and can't really even imagine what it's like. If you turn off a light in your room, most people have some kind of tiny blue light on some kind of electrical device, or there'll be some ambient light from street lamps or moonlight coming through gaps in the curtains. And when you're outside, there's always something, right? There's always something shining through the clouds or reflecting off the clouds. So we're just not psychologically used to that kind of darkness.
Yeah, I think the only place that you can probably find that in an Earth analog or comparison probably be in those deep caves where they don't. But yeah, like dark adaptation, we have receptors in our eyes that allow us to adjust to the absence of light, over 30 to 45 minutes. But you're right, to your point, Lily, it's very much a process of just taking in the light that's still there. It's just kind of a slow kind of adaptation too, but we're never really in the pure just absence of all light. And so do humans even have that capability to do that? Because there's some interesting kind of hypotheses on what would happen if you were to do that, be exposed to no light for 30 days, what would happen to your vision? Short answer is nothing good, but, it's something that we really don't want to test out by any means. So, yeah.
This is why I feel like Scotland should really be at the forefront of space travel, because I didn't see the sun till I was about 6. It's just constantly bleak. So I think we'd be quite well suited to these like very extreme periods of darkness.
Inhospitable, used to it.
Yeah, I mean, winter lasts about 18 months.
Because there's no or very little sunlight in the south pole of the moon, does that mean that they will have to use a lot of artificial light, and that will again behave differently to the sunlight on the moon and artificial light on the Earth?
It's a great question. Yeah. So on the ISS, we've looked at different types of lighting to, kind of improve astronauts' circadian rhythms. So they don't, because on the ISS, they're experiencing like 16 to 17 sunrises and sunsets a day. They're traveling around the Earth every 90 minutes. So yeah, it's pretty intense for that reason. So we have a pretty good understanding of what types of lighting can make, the circadian rhythms of astronauts better. But the thing is it's still not, it's not going to, nothing replaces the sun's light, or at least what we're used to on Earth. And also, even just because you get a little sun exposure in space, you are not being protected by any type of ray emissions. So you're looking at, radiation, X-ray, U-ray, you name it, cosmic rays, So when you get that little, spurt of light, maybe at the South Pole, every couple hours, it doesn't necessarily mean that it may not, afford any positive effects, especially with shielding. You're probably not going to get any effects of it at all, rather just to protect the astronauts. So yeah, it's pretty crazy stuff.
So when humans go to any kind of extreme environment, whether it's the depths of the ocean or space or anything like that, like we don't change the environment that we're going to. We simply take our habitable environment with us in spacesuits or diving suits or, pods and all that sort of thing. What other areas of research is NASA exploring in terms of humans being in these extremely inhospitable environments? You mentioned radiation, a second ago. These are things that people might not really consider. You might think the biggest challenge is just getting there, but once you get there, there's a whole host of new challenges because the human body just isn't designed to be in that environment.
Yeah, we try and touch on everything that we can. We really try to be thorough with that, because all of these things, is the way that we approach it is, pretty much every health issue, cognitive issue, we want to see it as like a web of issue, like it all kind of is a very holistic. We need to address all these aspects. So I appreciate that question. I would say in terms of, physiology, fluid shifts are a really big one. So in microgravity, all of your fluid shifts upward, and it can give the appearance sometimes of like, that puffy face, reduction in leg mass, and which can also result in, cardiovascular issues. Your heart doesn't have to work as hard to pump blood throughout the body, which can also, present concerns if you're not very healthy, re-entering Earth's atmosphere and being exposed to, up to maybe 5-7 times, depending on if it's a safe, descent, it's maybe only a few times beyond your weight. So, 4, 5, 6 Gs, probably 6 Gs on average, I would say. And, so with that, you need to make sure that your heart can withstand, not having to work as hard for an extended period of time, and then also just coming back to Earth. So adaptation back to Earth is really one of the wildest things when it comes to just what your body has to go through to readapt to something that genetically it's bounded to. And so, we really are looking into that to kind of make that transition easier. Something too that we look just for long duration space missions is, extreme isolation. On the ISS, we have mission control, they're on call 24/7, they're a second of communication, response away essentially. But the further that astronauts move away from Earth, that communication delay is going to increase dramatically. They have to become fully autonomous at some point. especially when they're going to Mars. So, when we're looking at, medical issues, or just how they spend their time, we're trying to basically make it so, okay, you're a fully autonomous crew. You can solve issues on your own, essentially, and if you need, you can, send us a call. But if you're on your way to Mars, you're going to wait a couple hours, to get a response and so forth. So, when it comes down to, things like that, it's definitely, a challenge. But, Earth-like smells, the sounds of nature, little things that we take for granted on Earth, astronauts miss so much, especially food. A lot of times, people don't think about how do we process all this food, but food is such a crucial thing that they look forward to and is so vital to, how it's basically not only just for nutrition, but just the way things are packaged. Just so many things just kind of take the humanity out of you when you're in those environments and you have to adapt. So we really want to look into it really just come down to some of the little things that you wouldn't think of. And so listening to astronauts and, when they tell us like, hey, like, I think we need this, like this is getting, we need more of, activities, or we need better food. We need to figure out how to grow our own food. I know some astronauts say that, they miss taking a shower. They don't take a shower for, 9 months on the ISS. So things that were just mundane to us. So I think that overall we have very highly trained and qualified astronauts. So at this point, it's, once we get, the challenging issues, like, okay, we have solid spacecraft, we have a solid plan, everything seems in place, we can't forget about those other things. And that really wasn't factored into in the Apollo missions at all. So we definitely are obviously going to be changing that. So.
And these physiological effects that you mentioned, the fluid being in different positions in your body, does this also affect the astronauts' senses? I think I heard something about it affecting their taste, but could this also affect their vision and affect their ability to do all the things we talked about before, their ability to complete tasks?
Absolutely. So when these fluids just kind of, come up through the sinusoidal cavities, so if you have sinus problems, you probably are not, you're not going to be considered for selection because of this, because, we do, see astronauts, they experience all this fluid buildup. So something interesting that we've been seeing happening is that a lot of this fluid is causing pressure on some of their optic nerves. And we have not been able to fully generalize what this effect does, because it kind of impacts everyone differently, just how everyone has different, capabilities for vision. So we've had this fluid shift, when it creates this pressure on the back of the eye, it ends up changing the anatomical structure of the eye. So one of two things can happen. You can come back to Earth as an astronaut and have distorted vision, or I've actually talked to at least one astronaut who came back and had perfect vision.
Another way that we sense light that can affect astronauts' vision is when humans are outside the Earth's magnetosphere, they're exposed to more of the spectrum of light than we are used to. What effects could prolonged exposure to this have on the astronauts' vision? Just like you mentioned, the different pressures of fluids in the body can change astronauts' vision. This exposure could also affect their eyes and their senses.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So just intense exposure to sunlight in space, and we do have shielding designed for this, and I can get to that after I kind of run through my list of potential issues. But it is still something that, we need to monitor carefully, so prolonged exposure to sunlight in space without any, protection or minimal protection, that can result in cataracts. We also have this interesting effect called snow blindness, which is like corneal inflammation. A lot of people in the Antarctic. So if we actually, I worked with two explorers, Justin Packshaw and Dr. Jamie Facer-Childs. They kite skied across Antarctica and collected a bunch of data for NASA and ESA. And, we talked about that issue with snow blindness because you have one color essentially in Antarctica for the, 90% of the terrain, at certain times of the year, and you have constant sun just reflecting. So if you're a skier, if you're a snowboarder, it's the same concept where you get that, constant kind of reflection, and if for a couple hours, not a big deal. For prolonged exposure, we have this issue of snow blindness, which essentially is, just inflammation of the cornea. And then you can just have retinal damage just from the high energy particles, causing vision problems. You can get these weird kind of floaters, which a lot of, eye doctors, tend to monitor closely in terms of they don't want any, debris or damage floating around there, behind the eye in that fluid. And also something interesting that astronauts have reported, which we aren't sure exactly, we don't believe it's harmful, but it's interesting. They experience this like light flash phenomena. So we call it, this cosmic ray visual phenomena where there are these high energy particles that are passing through the visual or retinal cortex. And astronauts are saying like, yeah, I'm getting these really brief light flashes. And so while they're not harmful, they can be kind of distracting. So, we have grown in our understanding of just this, the range at which we can have these risks. But yeah, just to mitigate them, I mean, we have, our protective measures, obviously the spacecraft, shielding, specialized, ways to block UV radiation. We've been working on that for a while. And also just monitoring ocular health, pre, during, and post, spaceflight too. So, but yeah, I think, and when we do reach that point of, long duration missions to Mars, our goal is to not only just understand the harmful effects, but have a way to mitigate that in flight and also maybe treat it in flight. And so that's kind of like a next level challenge where it's easy to, okay, we identify the problem. Now, how, we can't always have all of our resources or ducks in a row in terms of how we kind of tackle medical problems just yet. So that's something that we're trying to figure out, what devices can we use? What medical interventions can we create or are available to prevent, long-term damage and things like that.
Do we know yet what the density is like of these high energy particles? Because I'm wondering, like, how often do they happen to pass through the optic nerve or the eye?
So, yeah, I mean, the range of cosmic particles, I mean, you have, I know iron is a really big one. I know that, you have silicon and a few others that our radiation groups tend to kind of hone in on with the more, these denser types of particles. And I think overall, Earth's magnetosphere does protect us. And we are still trying to, I guess, pose the question of, okay, yes, encountering a cosmic ray burst is extremely intense. Space is very big. So we obviously know what would happen if it did happen. But in terms of the statistical probability, it's kind of is something that we're still trying to, I guess, model in terms of, okay, what is the actual likelihood? What are the interventions of this? But also when we go to Mars too, just, radiation exposure and other kinds of surface exposures, to certain chemicals on the Mars surface also can create problems as well. So, but yeah, I say it's not like life-threatening frequent in terms of that, but the presence of them exists. And we've just been very fortunate that we haven't really had to, face any detrimental things like that because of, Earth's magnetosphere and things like that. So,
yeah, I've heard that it's frequent enough that they have to, even in aircraft actually on Earth, but expect even more on spacecraft, have to include redundancy in their computational systems so that if there is a cosmic ray that hits the system and it flips a bit, it doesn't cause the system to fail or computations to go terribly wrong. And so that how much redundancy is built into the computers kind of reflects how probable we think it is for these cosmic rays to hit them. And there are different levels of that in different environments. Like Earth, we still do it. And then for Mooncraft, we'd have to do even more. So maybe that's where more of the risk lies, actually, is computers going wrong and then life support systems going down.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think, because we've been looking at different, shielding strategies for a while. And so I think the moon is going to be our test bed for so many kind of validation, verification, or just, trial and error, I guess, but within, with a low risk of, probability, regarding safety. But so I would say that, we're really going to learn a lot in terms of what types of materials can we use, how do our systems work on the moon, and also, a lunar analog. Then, once we reach that point where we have gateway and we have established our own, station around the moon, then we can look at these systems and say, okay, well, this works here on the moon. We think this will work on Mars. Why it might, why it might not, things like that. We're still, but we are prepared. That's definitely on the line where we, once we reach success on the moon, we still might have to go down, back to square one with a couple of these things, just because it is, you know, just a different environment essentially in a number of ways. So
it's incredible when you think about the vastness of space that you can get hit by anything. It's like, it just feels really unlucky that if you're out there in the universe and that anything at all hits you, that's just, I mean, that's my level of bad luck. You know, it's like being in a stadium that a bird poos on you. You know, it's just, that was a really bad analogy. So
no, it's so true. Like that. Yeah. Like you have a tiny little micrometeorite that's flying at like 30,000 miles an hour, just, you know, around, you know, and that's, yeah, it can just rip through your spacesuit. It can rip through anything. And we have had a few instances on the ISS where we've had little, you know, pieces of debris. Like space debris, you know, it can be a problem, you know, if that's why, you know, all of our space agencies, just not NASA, but globally, we have to be very, you know, strategic in terms of where we kind of land things, you know, especially when we're retiring stuff. But yeah, especially with micrometeoroids and things like that, it's a real concern. So you're not alone in that by any means when it comes to that.
When you fear the bird poo, you're just like an astronaut fearing
a micro asteroid. Thank you. I feel a lot more important now. I was reading the other day about space junk and space debris and everything, and there's lots of startups there's actually some in Scotland and there's some in Europe that are working to use AI to sort of map all the space junk that we can, so that we can hopefully one day try and fix it. But as more and more commercial companies get involved in space, and as it becomes just a more normal thing to launch things up into orbit, the amount of space junk it's going to increase exponentially. It's going to be, I mean, already when you look at the models of how much there is up there, it feels crazy that there's so much junk. And there's Elon Musk's car just floating around as well.
Is it a full-size car?
It's an actual car. I'm not a massive fan of Elon Musk, and that feels like such an obnoxious thing to do. You know? It's like, space isn't ours. We can't just go and like dump all of our crap in it.
What was the purpose of that? Was it just showing off, or was there something?
Just showing off.
There wasn't anything to learn from it.
Can't drive cars in space.
Yeah, so we learned that. That's useful.
Cargo roads, car no go space. So anyway, one thing that we were talking about a little while ago was that obviously a lot of these phenomenon they sound really inconvenient if you're an astronaut on the moon, but some of them also sound really beautiful, like the lunar horizon glow caused by the scattering of sunlight through dust in the atmosphere. Do you reckon that'll be like a tourist attraction, you know, maybe even just in VR? And also, is that kind of thing unique to our moon, or are you going to get that in any kind of low-ish gravity environment?
Yeah, you know, it's kind of like, you know, the northern lights of our little solar system. But no, yeah, so it isn't actually, I guess unique to the moon. So it's basically a lot of airless bodies. They're basically, planets or moons or, somewhere in between within exospheres or just any tenuous type of atmosphere. Mercury, for example, has a similar kind of lunar, or I guess, well, not lunar, but horizon glow effect, and has specific appearance and characteristics of that horizon glow, and it really just depends on like just what composition of the surface, the density. Obviously with Mercury being closer to the sun, it's going to have probably a different, more unique kind of angle of incidence, sunlight scattering and creating that glow. But it has been observed what they think they call like Mercury's tail or sodium or something, like it's a certain type of tail. And, this tail is basically just caused by the sun just scattering light off of just sodium atoms in Mercury's exosphere. And it creates like a faint kind of elongated glow, away from the planet. If you've seen any of those illustrations, our solar system has a tail. Everything just kind of has a solar tail because we're moving through it. But, Mercury tends to have like a unique kind of, glow to it as well. And, and we see that just to, with for comets, for example, and, obviously just because of the ice and everything burning when it gets warm, you get that tail. So it really is just about the interaction of what the object in space is made of and how it responds to just a sun, heat from the sun. So, but yeah, because depending on like the type of chemical composition that it has, if you're taking chemistry, it's like, oh, you can create some pretty cool colors, and things like that. So,
it sounds beautiful. It might take a little bit more than that for me to go to Mercury, though. It feels fairly inhospitable. It's like I won't even go to the north of Scotland to see the Northern Lights. So I'm definitely not going to go to Mercury. So with that said, I think now it might be time for some wild speculation.
In each episode of The Last Question, we ask our guests to look beyond the scope of their research and speculate wildly about the future. Katt, if you could change one thing about the human body to make us better suited for space, what would it be?
Well, that's a good one. I guess I know it can be like imaginative, but I'm also, the scientist in me is trying to combine the two, maybe do like a sci-fi response. I would probably say, one benefit would be cell regeneration, just like constant, being able to reproduce, having a way to discard and just reproduce, damaged cells. So kind of like being a water bear or the tardigrades, those types of little tiny organisms can survive in the vacuum of space. But once they reach an environment that is, conducive, they can essentially just wake up and take off and take off from where their former life was. So I think that would be something really cool. Obviously, humans being very complex, that would be very challenging, but that would be, in a perfect world, I think that would be really cool. For the human body, just to be able to, because then that way, it wouldn't be an issue of long-term space travel if you could just go dormant and then wake up and, oh my gosh, you're here, you're on Mars, or, you're not, I guess. And also just it would deal with so many health issues just in general, just in terms of, curing so many problems that humans deal with.
Yeah, I imagine they're researching it. Well, I think they're researching it a lot now for anti-aging treatments. And then the byproduct of that could be in space, it will help a lot, even on a shorter term. I was going to
say tardigrades are easily my top 3 animals. Like, they're just so cool. And they're little adorable little guys,
How do we cross tardigrade with human? This is an experiment.
There's some sort of clothing brand that's just released. It's like a duvet style jacket that looks a lot like a tardigrade.
Oh.
It's really weird.
How many arms does it have?
Only 2.
Oh.
Because it's still made for humans. It's not made for tardigrades.
A giant tardigrade.
Yeah.
Because you could cross a human and a tardigrade, and instead of getting a human that can regenerate its cells, you just get a massive tardigrade.
Yeah, with only 2 arms and blue eyes or something.
Yeah.
That'd be messed up.
When you said cell regeneration, for some reason, I thought you said celery generation.
Celery. Well, we can go with that too. We can see where that would get us. And we would have unlimited amounts of celery on every spacecraft. Just the most flavorful of all the vegetables.
Can you imagine if that's all we could take into space if they only had celery? I just punt myself out the airlock immediately.
Oh God, I know. Well, I mean, they've been trying to, they've been looking to grow some microgreens and things like that. But I mean, there's nothing that beats just getting like a Five Guys cheeseburger, though. And it's just like, you guys, why can't we have that? Just figured that out. But of course, we have to be very healthy. But I think that, that would be pretty, celery regeneration might be maybe not at the top of NASA's list, but definitely planned.
We'll start a letter writing campaign to try and get it, bumped up the agenda a little bit.
Celery, not burgers.
So we can have celery on burgers.
You have lab-grown burgers maybe in space one day, or like a 3D food printer that prints anything. I mean, as long as you have the elements.
We really wanted to look into that, and I know that the Food Lab did for some time. I guess there was just some logistics behind it, just in terms of like that. But yeah, I mean, printing 3D food, that would be great. Just imagine like what you could, I mean, even if it's like a Beyond Burger, it's still a burger. It's like I would still, eat it and whatnot. But I think I think it was just like cleaning it or something. I can't really remember exactly what the issue was. It was quite a while, but we are 3D printing habitats to see how that can create some sustainable construction for like habitats on the moon and potentially on Mars. So I think at NASA JSC they just finished building their 3D printed habitat, and so they're testing it out and seeing it's pretty neat. So maybe using like the materials around you, and things like that. So
I read something the other day about they've just done some research into extracting water molecules from dust particles on the moon for like a really enormous supply of water. The problem is I cannot remember anything about it, so it's a moot point, and I probably shouldn't have brought it up.
It's interesting from just that little snippet, though. Yeah. You've got the headline, but not the article.
Exactly. Yeah. Classic me. Probably didn't pay for the subscription.
Well, I know that they have found areas of opportunity to do that, and we've also, I think it's called MOXIE, is like It's a similar concept, not for water, but for oxygen, that is basically, I think it's for the Martian atmosphere to convert the Martian atmosphere into breathable oxygen. So yeah, we definitely have something like that for water as well. I don't know how, far along is it. I'm only more familiar with the atmospheric conversion one. But yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of water on the moon. It's just mining. Mining is super expensive. And I mean, we have enough issues mining on Earth without, we can only get this far, into the Earth's crust. It's insane. So we probably need to really just upgrade a lot of our mining gear too, if we really want to get down into the, the surface and see what's down there. But yeah, I mean, there's probably a good chance that we could eventually, but yeah, it's probably not there yet, I don't think.
I really admire humanity for finding all these like really difficult things on Earth, like mining, and then thinking, right, this is super tough and we have not perfected it. Let's do it on the moon. Rather than like thinking, let's sort it out. It's like, no, straight to the moon. It's going to be awesome. We'd like to thank Dr. Katherine Rahill for joining us today for that fascinating look at the future of humanity in space and how humans are going to cope in space. If you'd like to find out more about lunar psychophysics and Katherine's research, you can check out her website, kattrahill.com. That's KATTRAHILL.com.
And here we are, the last question. This is where we pose our listeners a question, and in the future, we'll discuss some of the most interesting answers. Our question this week is, will human beings have a permanent off-world colony by 2050?
And that's it from us today. We'll be back next time with more insight, innovation, and wild speculation. Feel free to drop us an email to say hello or to suggest a topic or just make conversation. You can reach us at datafest@thedatalab.com, or you can find us on Twitter @datafest_.
If you enjoyed the podcast, please do leave us a review on your platform of choice. It goes a long way and means a lot to us. Thank you for listening. Join us again next time for another episode of The Last Question. Goodbye. Yours, glass, go to mine.